August 19, 1944, Wehrmacht Headquarters, East Prussia. General Oberst Alfred Jodl studied the latest reports from the collapsing Western Front. His staff had run the numbers on Allied supply lines now stretched more than 400 miles from the Normandy beaches to General Patton's fast-moving Third Army. The conclusion looked obvious. Patton had pushed too far too quickly. No army could keep advancing at that speed without fuel. Jodl believed the Americans would run dry within days, maybe even hours. From Hitler's Wolfschanze headquarters, Jodl reviewed the reality all German commanders knew from experience. An armored division burned through 150,000 gallons of fuel every single day while advancing. With American spearheads now 400 miles from their depots, the math seemed clear. Patton's tanks would stop, giving the Wehrmacht precious time to regroup along the Seine and possibly hold until winter. What Jodl could not see was that just 125 miles away, more than 5,158 trucks were already on the move. Their headlights cut through the night as convoys rolled eastward non-stop, moving 2,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. This was the Red Ball Express, a supply system so bold and so massive that German planners had never imagined it could exist. Within 72 hours, Patton's tanks, expected to sit idle, were crashing through German defenses at the Seine. Within a week, Paris was liberated. Within a month, American troops stood at Germany's border. The Wehrmacht's best officers were about to learn a harsh truth. American logistics would redefine modern warfare. And this lesson came thanks to 23,000 truck drivers, 75% of them African American, who created the most efficient military supply line in history by turning French roads into a one-way highway system. German confidence in American failure came from long experience. They themselves had pioneered blitzkrieg and revolutionized combined arms warfare. Yet they also knew how quickly success turned to disaster once supplies fell behind. In Russia, their offensives had slowed not from Soviet resistance in the early stages, but because supplies simply couldn't reach the front. German trucks failed on rough Russian roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still making up 80% of German transport, couldn't keep pace with panzer units. Railways with different track gauges left supplies stacked far behind the lines. In July 1944, General der Panzertruppe Heinrich von Lüttwitz, soon to command the 47th Panzer Corps, wrote that the Americans faced the same fate. He argued their advantage in machines would become a weakness. Machines require fuel, ammunition, and parts. They have advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what comes next: paralysis. German intelligence carefully tracked American consumption. A Sherman tank burned 0.5 miles per gallon on roads, even worse off-road. An infantry division needed 700 tons of supplies each day. An armored division required 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions spread across a 60-mile front. That added up to 12,000 tons daily. Supplies that had to travel 400 miles over damaged roads in a network the Germans had destroyed during their retreat. On August 20th, General Major Siegfried Westphal, soon to serve as Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, summed up the situation. Even if the Americans had unlimited trucks, which they didn't, and perfect roads, which they didn't, and even if every vehicle worked flawlessly, which was impossible, they could not sustain Patton's advance for more than 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry, he insisted. But on August 25, 1944, in a requisitioned French chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Lauren Ayres of the Motor Transport Service told his fellow officers the exact opposite. Patton's army was using up supplies faster than any force in history, moving at speeds no existing plan could handle. Rail transport, scheduled convoys, and traditional depots had all collapsed.
Ayres laid out a radical solution. We're going to create a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front.
Every vehicle will run 20 hours out of 24. No stopping except for gas or emergencies. We will move 2,500 tons a day, minimum. The term Red Ball came from American railroads, where a Red Ball freight was a priority shipment. The Red Ball Express followed the same rule. Absolute priority, no delays. The plan ignored every accepted principle of military logistics. 2 separate highways, one for loaded trucks eastbound, one for empty trucks westbound. Operations running around the clock, headlights blazing despite blackout rules. No stops except for fuel or breakdowns. Convoys spaced at 5-minute intervals, running an average of 35 minutes. Mobile repair teams every 50 miles. military police checkpoints ready to pull off any truck that dropped below 25 mm. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, who commanded the advanced section of the communications zone, reviewed the numbers. They needed 140 truck companies and at least 5,158 vehicles, all maintained at 90% availability. By any logistics standard, this was impossible. Yet within 36 hours, it was reality. On August 26th, drivers of the 39th 16th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW, two 1-2-ton trucks nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, and carried 105 mm artillery shells east to Patton's guns at Mo, 300 miles away. The makeup of the Red Ball Express stunned German racial theorists. Of the 23,000 drivers who ran the route, about 75% were African American soldiers, serving in a segregated army that still denied them equal rights at home. These men, barred from white facilities in America, were now keeping Patton's famous army in motion. They quickly built their own culture on the road. Trucks carried painted slogans: Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. They enforced their own rules. Slower trucks pulled over, broken vehicles were shoved into ditches, and any driver below 20 mph was treated as a roadblock. By August 28th, German reconnaissance began reporting strange new sights. Observation units from Aufklärung 116 radioed back. Continuous vehicle column, headlights visible for 20 kilometers. No spacing, no blackout. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. They warned that the Americans had abandoned every normal precaution of warfare. On August 30th, General Lieutenant Edgar Feuchtinger, commander of the 21st Panzer Division, personally watched the Red Ball Express. His report to Army Group B showed disbelief. The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles pass every 30 seconds day and night without pause. They do not hide. They do not disperse. They follow none of the rules we understand. This is not military science, it is mass production applied to war. The Germans could not grasp that American logistics worked on a completely different principle. Where their own doctrine relied on concealment and caution, the United States relied on overwhelming volume. Where German commanders conserved every vehicle, the Americans expected at least 20% of their trucks to break down and planned for it. Where German doctrine demanded strict rules, the Americans improvised constantly. The results of the Red Ball Express stunned German observers because they broke every calculation of what should have been possible. During its first week, August 25th to 31st, 1944, the Red Ball Express delivered 89,139 tons of supplies. The daily average was 12,048 tons. The round-trip distance for convoys was 686 miles. The system rotated 5,958 trucks, each making about 5 trips per day. The operation itself consumed 300,000 gallons of fuel. German specialists captured these figures from American records and dismissed them as exaggeration. They weren't, and the numbers were still climbing. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had settled into a rhythm that German officers, still relying on horse-drawn wagons for 80% of their transport, could not understand. Convoys left every 5 minutes from the western terminus. Each convoy averaged 67 vehicles. Standard loads were 5 tons, but many trucks carried 7 tons. Covering the 350 miles one way took about 14 hours with a 2-hour turnaround at each end. At any given moment, 5,000 vehicles were on the move. The system generated non-stop innovation. Roughly 1,800 trucks broke down every day, but mobile maintenance units handled repairs right on the roadside. Mechanics adopted a triage rule: fix it in 15 minutes or push it off the road. If the problem was too severe, they stripped parts on the spot. Using mobile cranes, crews could swap entire engines in just 45 minutes. When the main route became clogged, drivers found alternatives. They cut new paths, pressed French buses into service to free up trucks for cargo, and even repainted captured German vehicles in olive drab to use them. When bridges lay in ruins, they built bypasses with rubble from destroyed buildings. To German eyes, this chaos should have collapsed into failure, but instead it created momentum. The most shocking discovery was fuel. The Red Ball Express alone burned 300,000 gallons of gasoline each day, more than some entire German armies received. Yet the Americans never ran short. A separate project, Operation Pluto, had laid pipelines across the English Channel, pumping fuel under the sea. By September 1944, those pipelines were working, but German intelligence had not even detected them. Along the Red Ball route, fuel depots stood every 25 miles. Tanker trucks ran their own convoys, ensuring that no truck waited more than 10 minutes to refuel. General Major Walter Warlimont looked at aerial photographs of these dumps and admitted in disbelief. The Americans have fuel reserves larger than our entire strategic stock. They burn more moving gasoline than we allocate to whole panzer divisions. This is not war as we know it, it is industrial excess. The Red Ball Express did more than sustain Patton's advance, it multiplied its speed. German doctrine said an armored division could advance 20 to 30 miles a day at best. Patton's divisions, powered by the Red Ball Express, advanced 40 to 60 miles a day for weeks. On September 1, 1944, the 4th Armored Division moved 35 miles in the morning, paused to refuel and reload at noon, and then pushed another 32 miles that afternoon. A 67-mile advance in one day crushed German expectations, which assumed no army could move more than 30 miles. In East Prussia, General Oberst Heinz Guderian read the reports and refused to believe them. No armored force can advance 60 miles a day for a week, he argued. Mechanical failures alone would prevent it. This must be propaganda or a reporting error. But intercepted American radio traffic confirmed the truth. Even worse, the Americans often broadcast their locations openly, without code, so confident in their speed that they didn't care if the Germans knew. By September 5, 1944, German intelligence had compiled full reports on the Red Ball Express. The conclusions were disastrous for Wehrmacht planning. Every assumption about American limits was false. The reports described violations of every rule: trucks abandoned instead of repaired, drivers running for days on stimulants, no camouflage discipline, mechanical failures at 30% daily. Yet the system still worked because the Americans had more vehicles, more parts and more fuel than the Germans could imagine. Field Marshal Walter Model gave the grim summary: "If these reports are correct, we do not face a superior army, we face a superior civilization. They waste because they can. They hide nothing because they do not fear us. They have resources without limit. We cannot defeat this with tactics." The drivers themselves paid the cost. Many operated for 72 hours straight, using Benzedrine to stay awake. Some began hallucinating from exhaustion. Accidents were constant. In the operational period, 300 drivers were killed. Trucks collided in fog, rolled off broken roads, or caught fire from overheated engines. Yet morale stayed high. For the mostly African-American drivers, denied equal rights back home, there was no doubt they were making history. Every mile driven, every ton delivered, proved Hitler's racial theories false. Captured German officers admitted the psychological effect. General Hans von Luck, taken prisoner in September 1944, told interrogators, "We knew we had lost when we understood your supply system. You broke every rule. Abandoned vehicles, wasted fuel, exhausted drivers, and still succeeded with sheer numbers. You have turned war into industry." For German soldiers, the psychological blow was crushing. At night they lay awake hearing the roar of American trucks, endless columns of engines carrying endless supplies. They had 3 rounds for each rifle, while the Americans brought millions. The sound of trucks itself became a weapon. Even the vehicles shocked German engineers. The GMC CCKW-2, 1 or 2 ton truck, the backbone of the Red Ball Express, was mass production at its peak. By the war's end, General Motors had built more than 500,000 of them, more trucks than the entire German military had of all types combined. Each truck came standard with features the Germans had never fielded at scale: all-wheel drive, waterproofing for 30-inch river crossings, engines that could run on low-quality fuel, automatic tire inflation, and heaters that actually worked. The American philosophy of maintenance stunned German observers. Where they rebuilt engines, the Americans replaced them. Where they rationed spare parts, the Americans threw away trucks for minor issues. Where they relied on master mechanics, the Americans used thousands of trained soldiers who could handle 80% of repairs. As the front advanced, the Red Ball Express adapted at a speed that left German planners stunned. When the original line to Chartres became insufficient, new extensions were added almost overnight. The White Ball Express from Rouen to Paris, the Green Diamond from Cherbourg to the railheads, the Red Lion from Bayeux to Brussels, and the ABC route from Antwerp to Brussels to Charleroi. The Red Ball Express had become more than a supply system. It was a moving symbol of American industrial power, reshaping the war day by day. Each new supply route was put into action within 48 hours of being planned. By comparison, German staff officers needed weeks to prepare operations of similar scale. The American method was simple: paint fresh markers, assign trucks, and start moving. Most of the drivers in the Red Ball Express were African American soldiers. This created a direct challenge to Nazi racial ideology. German propaganda had long claimed black people were inferior, unable to handle technical skills, and lacking initiative. Yet these drivers were keeping the Allied advance alive, pulling off supply feats that the Germans themselves couldn't match. The men behind the wheel knew exactly how ironic this was. Every mile driven proved Nazi theories wrong. Their trucks became weapons against racism itself. Some German prisoners were forced to help load Red Ball Express trucks. Many were stunned to find themselves working under African American sergeants who could calculate load weights faster than German engineers. Some even spoke English better than the Germans' own language instructors. To add to their shock, those same sergeants treated them fairly, completely different from the picture Nazi propaganda had painted about how other races would behave. The scale of the Red Ball Express was something German planners had considered impossible under battlefield conditions. American engineers kept the operation moving by building or reinforcing 40 bridges, creating 15 large fuel depots, setting up 26 repair and maintenance stations, and even constructing 8 temporary cities for drivers, all while convoys were still running. One bridge at Monty had been destroyed by German engineers to block American supplies. They calculated it would take at least 6 weeks to replace. American engineers built a temporary replacement in just 14 hours. Convoys only lost 8 miles of time on short bulldozed bypass roads. German engineers watched in disbelief. The Americans needed no endless meetings or detailed blueprints. They simply acted immediately, building faster than the Germans could destroy. German artillery officers were particularly shocked by one achievement. American ammunition deliveries far surpassed what German theory even considered possible. U.S. artillery fired freely without restriction, something no German unit had enjoyed since 1942. During the battle against the fortifications at Metz in September 1944, American Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in just 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every shell plus 20% extra. Meanwhile, German artillery defending Metz was rationed to only 50 rounds per gun each day. The imbalance was crushing. German officers calculated that such American firepower required 50 full truckloads of ammunition per hour. The Red Ball kept it coming without pause. Keeping this massive system alive came at a huge cost. Trucks wore out at incredible rates. By late September, the average vehicle lifespan was only 10,000 miles compared to a normal 30,000. Every day, 30% of trucks broke down. Mechanics were replacing 500 engines per week and burning through 10,000 tires weekly. More than 5,000 trucks were destroyed or abandoned altogether. Yet the flow of supplies never slowed. American industry had already planned for such losses. Ships kept arriving at French ports carrying hundreds of fresh trucks. Replacement drivers were trained in just 2 days and thrown into service. German calculations showed that the Americans were losing more trucks every week than the entire German army had in France, yet their supply capacity only increased. They had achieved the unthinkable, moving logistics faster than their own consumption. French civilians along the convoy routes witnessed American abundance firsthand. After years of German occupation and rationing, the sight of endless trucks loaded with supplies was overwhelming. Many African American drivers shared food, cigarettes, chocolate, and soap with children and families despite rules against it. The contrast with German occupation was undeniable. Americans gave away casually what Germans had tightly rationed. German intelligence noted the impact. French civilians now believed an Allied victory was certain. Resistance activity along convoy routes increased 400%. People who had tolerated German occupation now actively resisted it. In early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its toughest trial. Patton's Third Army had pushed so far forward that even this vast supply system struggled to keep pace. Round trips grew to more than 700 miles. Drivers collapsed from exhaustion. Trucks fell apart. German intelligence picked up on the strain. On September 8th, General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel reported that American supply lines were close to breaking. Convoy intervals had slowed from every 5 minutes to every 15, and vehicle speed was falling. He urged the high command to strike. But American flexibility again overturned German expectations. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express reorganized the entire system. Transfer points were set up to cut long runs into 350-mile sections. Driver rotation kept men rested. Forward repair bases shortened downtime. More vehicles were assigned. By September 12th, deliveries had actually increased. What should have been the breaking point only made the system stronger. At the same time, another supply method stunned the Germans even further. The U.S. launched massive aerial resupply operations. C-47 transport planes began dropping supplies directly to frontline units, each carrying 3 tons. On September 16, 1944, German observers counted 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering 2,700 tons. For comparison, the Luftwaffe's largest airlift, Stalingrad, had maxed out at only 300 tons daily, and even that had been seen as their limit. The Americans used planes as casually as trucks, ignoring escort needs or losses, overwhelming the numbers game with sheer scale. The Red Ball Express itself ran on principles that broke every German rule of command. In the Wehrmacht, junior officers could not make big decisions. In the U.S. system, lieutenants commanded operations that German colonels would have overseen, and sergeants often ran tasks equivalent to what German majors handled. German observers thought this chaos should lead to disaster. Instead, it created unmatched efficiency. The rigid hierarchy of the Wehrmacht could not compete. By October 1944, as American railways in France were rebuilt, the Red Ball Express began to wind down. What was supposed to be a 10-day emergency measure had lasted 82 days. In that time, it delivered 412,000 tons of supplies, covering 122 million ton miles. Field Marshal Walter Model later wrote, "We were not defeated by American tanks or planes primarily. We were defeated by American trucks." Even as railroads took over, the American pace amazed German prisoners. U.S. railroad engineers rebuilt 1,000 miles of destroyed French track while the Red Ball was still operating, often using captured German rail equipment. They laid new lines faster than Germans had destroyed them. The final tallies of the Red Ball Express shocked German officers reviewing them in captivity. In just 82 days, it moved 412,193 tons of supplies across 222 million ton miles, using an average of 5,158 trucks and peaking at 7,000. A total of 23,000 drivers kept it moving. The convoys consumed 700,000 gallons of fuel every single day, delivered 40,000 tons of ammunition to Patton alone, transported 15 million rations, and carried 135,000 tons of medical supplies. German staff had believed they had overestimated American supply capability by tripling their own best numbers. In reality, they were wrong by a factor of 10. The Red Ball Express didn't just move supplies, it destroyed German faith in their own military superiority. Wehrmacht officers who once mocked Americans as soft and overly dependent on machines were forced to watch those same Americans achieve supply miracles through determination and industrial strength. German prisoners in camps would stand silently at the fences, counting the endless Red Ball trucks rolling by. Some even wept. They realized it wasn't just that the Americans could supply their armies, it was that they could afford to waste more than Germany could produce. Their entire worldview was collapsing, one truck at a time. The Red Ball Express also triggered an internal reckoning inside the U.S. Army. The system's success depended heavily on African American soldiers, men who were still segregated, denied equal rights, and barred from combat roles. In September 1944, General Dwight D. Eisenhower visited the Red Ball operations. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, later wrote that Eisenhower watched black drivers who had been on the road for 20 hours straight. The general said, "These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to reconsider many things." That moment highlighted a contradiction America could not ignore. Only 3 years later, the military would begin desegregation, pushed in part by the performance of these drivers. For the men of the Red Ball Express, this was their battlefield, and they proved themselves without question. Nazi racial theorists had no way to explain what they were seeing. SS racial science journals stopped mentioning American logistics altogether. The evidence was too strong, the contradiction too humiliating. German engineers, however, studied the Red Ball Express after the war with great seriousness. The lessons reshaped logistics worldwide. Volume beats inefficiency, mechanical redundancy removes weak points, decentralization increases speed, Standardization multiplies capability, and human endurance is far greater than most armies assume. In 1950, General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, admitted, "The Red Ball Express proved logistics determined strategy, not the other way around." Americans understood this. We learned too late. Among the 23,000 Red Ball drivers, stories of individual heroism stood out. Military records confirmed them. Corporal John L. Houston once drove for 48 straight hours to deliver ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division at Cambrai. He fell asleep at the wheel 3 times, but other drivers woke him and he kept going. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire when overheated brakes ignited while carrying medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it as regulations required, he drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to a field hospital, jumping out as flames reached the cab. His delivery saved the lives of wounded soldiers from both sides. These acts, repeated thousands of times, revealed a culture of initiative and mission focus that Germans could not comprehend. In late 1944, German forces tried to copy the concept. During Operation Greif in the Battle of the Bulge, they planned to use captured U.S. trucks to create their own high-speed supply network. The effort collapsed almost immediately. German drivers couldn't match American convoy speeds. German mechanics couldn't keep U.S. vehicles running. German fuel reserves couldn't handle the consumption rates. Most importantly, they couldn't imitate the American mindset of simply replacing what broke. Oberstleutnant in charge of the operation admitted, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." The winter of 1944-45 brought the harshest test of all. Freezing rain, snow, and ice should have ended truck transport altogether. German doctrine stated wheeled supply became impossible below 10°C. Yet the Red Ball Express kept moving. Drivers wrapped chains on tires, poured alcohol into radiators, and pushed on. Convoy speeds dropped from 35 mph to 15 mph, but supplies still arrived. German observers reported seeing ice-covered convoys moving through blizzards that had stopped entire panzer divisions. The Americans had built a logistics system that ignored weather, terrain, and enemy attacks. It wasn't efficient by German standards, but it was unstoppable. By May 1945, captured German logistics officers were required to study the Red Ball Express. Their conclusions were humiliating but unanimous. General der Infanterie Friedrich Schultz summarized, "The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined. Americans created a temporary civilization. Thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies that existed only to feed armies, then dissolved when no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They built superior temporary systems in days." Even General Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, acknowledged the truth. He wrote that Germany had invented fast armored warfare, but never solved its supply limitations. The Americans solved it through industrial excess we believed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line. It was a river of material that drowned our forces. The cost was staggering. The Red Ball Express in 1944 alone consumed roughly $100 million. Lost vehicles, burned fuel, ruined roads, and French claims for damages. German officers who had spent their careers managing scarcity could not fathom such figures. Yet the U.S. considered it cheap. The operation helped capture 400,000 German soldiers, liberated France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war in Europe by an estimated 6 months. Every single day of war cost the U.S. $250 million. By that measure, the Red Ball Express paid for itself in just 1 day of shortened conflict. Lieutenant General John C.H. Lee, head of logistics for the European theater, later reflected, "We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any previous war, that would have been catastrophic losses. In an industrial war, it was acceptable overhead." After the war, the effects of the Red Ball Express continued in surprising ways. Thousands of drivers returned home with the experience of operating the world's largest trucking network. Many went on to start freight companies, design the interstate highway system, and create the modern American trucking industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways trace their origins to Red Ball veterans. These men had learned in France that volume beats efficiency, speed beats perfection, and if trucks keep moving 24 hours a day, you can move an entire nation. Military historians now agree. The Red Ball Express was the decisive supply operation of the European theater. Without it, Patton's advance would have stalled. Paris would have been liberated weeks later and German winter defenses could have held. The operation validated the American belief that logistics decides wars. While German officers obsessed over Clausewitz and battlefield maneuvers, Americans focused on Detroit factories and railway timetables. The Red Ball Express showed that in modern war, supply lines decide victory more than battlefield tactics. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Supreme German Commander in the West, received a full intelligence report on the Red Ball Express. After hours of study, he gathered his staff. "Gentlemen," he said, "we face something beyond a military solution. The Americans have built a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed their advance would collapse once they outran their supply. That point does not exist. They have changed warfare. We are fighting the last war." When his operations officer, General Hans Speidel, suggested using the Luftwaffe to attack the convoys, von Rundstedt gave his final judgment. "With what shall we interdict? They have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000 and we cannot, they will replace them in a week." The Red Ball Express had broken the German war machine. The Red Ball Express was more than just a supply system. It became one of the most decisive operations of World War II. To understand its impact, you first have to look at the scale. German intelligence estimated they would need to destroy 200 trucks every single day just to keep up with American production. But the U.S. didn't even have 200 aircraft available to attempt that. Numbers told only part of the story. What really struck German observers were the people behind those trucks. There were drivers who had been awake for 3 straight days, refusing to hand their vehicles over because they knew replacements might not make it through. Mechanics worked in freezing rain to keep convoys moving. Teenagers who had lied about their age just to get behind the wheel carried supplies into combat zones. Stories like these spread quickly, building a reputation that went beyond logistics. To the Germans, Americans were not the soft troops their propaganda had described. They worked themselves harder than the Germans drove their own horses, and they did it out of choice, not fear. That made them even more dangerous than German commanders had believed. The Red Ball Express soon turned into a kind of unplanned propaganda campaign. At night, German soldiers could hear the roar of convoys that never seemed to end. The sound itself became a weapon, breaking morale before battles even started. Some units even reported hearing what they called ghost convoys, phantom engines they imagined at night. This was psychological warfare at its most effective. American specialists noticed this and started broadcasting truck engine noises toward German lines whenever real convoys weren't present. Reports came back that German troops believed the sounds were real, showing just how deeply shaken they had become. By November 1944, once railroads were partially restored, the Red Ball Express was officially shut down. But the way it operated changed military logistics forever. The U.S. had shown that huge, continuous, and even wasteful supply efforts could win wars. One of the most impressive details was how fast it all ended. 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, and hundreds of supply points disappeared in just 72 hours. Everything was reassigned, recycled, or returned to civilian use. By contrast, German forces needed months to build smaller operations and sometimes years to shut them down. The Americans simply built what was needed, used it, and moved on to something bigger. When the war ended in May 1945, many captured German generals admitted the Red Ball Express had crushed their hopes of victory. General der Panzertrooper Hasse von Manteuil put it bluntly in his interrogation. "When we understood your logistics capacity, we knew the war was lost. You could supply armies faster than we could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon against which we had no defense." Field Marshal Albert Kessler, one of Germany's most skilled commanders, was asked after the war what had surprised him most about the Americans. His answer was striking. Not your tanks, not your planes, your trucks. For him, the Red Ball Express proved that America had militarized its entire economy. German armies weren't just fighting American soldiers, they were fighting American factories. The final numbers of the Red Ball Express remain astonishing. 412,193 tons of cargo delivered 122 million ton miles, covered 5,158 trucks on average, with peaks of 7,000. 23,000 drivers involved, 82 days of operation. 57 million gallons of fuel consumed, $180,000 Tires worn out more than 5,000. Vehicles destroyed $100 million total cost. 47 German divisions defeated through supply advantage. An estimated 180 days cut from the length of the war. These figures show why the Red Ball Express mattered. They mark the moment when logistics became more decisive than battlefield maneuvers. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the U.S. Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp at the National Postal Museum in Washington. D.C. veterans gathered there remembered their work with pride. Most of those drivers had been African American soldiers, segregated, discriminated against, and denied recognition during the war. Yet they had delivered victory at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express proved a fundamental truth. In modern war, logistics isn't just support. It is the main effort. The Germans had believed Americans would conserve resources and move cautiously, but instead they faced an unstoppable flow of supplies. What they saw was a logistics tidal wave that drowned their armies in Allied abundance. The operation succeeded not because of clever strategy, but because of qualities German commanders never understood: American mechanical skill, industrial capacity, improvisation, and above all, the initiative of ordinary soldiers making independent decisions. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army relied heavily on the Red Ball Express, later wrote the greatest tribute to those drivers. The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserved as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. They drove through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. Without them, the Third Army doesn't move. Without movement, we don't win. They were black soldiers mostly, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition. But they won the war as surely as any rifleman. History must record this truth. The Red Ball Express achieved what German science declared impossible. 23,000 drivers and 6,000 trucks supplied advancing armies faster than physics should have allowed. They proved that in modern warfare, the side with the most trucks would beat the side with the most tactics. German generals who mocked American logistics in August 1944 signed surrender papers only 82 days later. By the time it ended on November 16, 1944, the Red Ball Express had reshaped military thinking. It showed that in the industrial era, victory goes not to the boldest generals but to the nation that can deliver the most supplies, the fastest, and the farthest. The roads of France still carry the marks of those convoys: broken bridges, worn-out highways, and wrecked trucks. But the true monument to the Red Ball Express is the time it shaved off the war. Every day saved meant thousands of lives spared, and this operation cut months from the conflict. A German officer once summed it up perfectly. Watching the endless stream of American trucks roll by, he said, "We prepared for your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" That was the question Germany never answered. The Red Ball Express had turned trucks into America's most decisive weapon, and in doing so, it rewrote the rules of modern warfare.